What is up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Preferred Walk-Ons, a college football show about college football. I am Jeremy Taché, wearing a cutoff tank top from Camp Fiesta because I wanted to look like a weird person today.
It looked like a Go-Gurt tube.
Oh my God, I do look like a Go-Gurt tube. Were you just saying that? We've been talking for 20 minutes before we started this. Were you just saying?
No, I literally just thought of it.
Just thought, I'm proud of you. And that's Dimitri Zamaris. We are here to talk to you about the worst conference in all of Power 5 football.
Oh, by far.
The most boring, the least talented, and you're welcome. This is going to be great. The Pac-12. And let me start here before we get to the Pac-12. And I told Meech I wanted to start here. Last night, I was up until about 3 a.m. watching a rerun of the American Athletic Conference Championship. And because last episode, on our Big 12 episode, I did not get to UCF until the very end. I want to start there and just say a couple of things about that AAC championship game. Number one, holy shit, it was amazing.
Yes,
Number
it was.
two, Daryl Mack throws such a pretty deep ball. And I really hope he comes back healthy to play for UCF this year. And number three, and this is something you and I have spoken about before, but I'll never understand why Tristan Hill didn't play every single snap on defense for UCF. It was an unbelievable difference. I had never watched that game on TV because I was there. So I had never, you as you're in the moment and you're looking back at the stats later and you're reading articles and you're realizing, oh, Tristan Hill wasn't on the field. There was a big difference when he was and when he wasn't. But my God, when you're watching it on TV, you could literally see the physical difference. It was unreal what a difference he made. And the same deal, obviously, with LSU. But the funny thing is that I feel that much more confident in what I said about Memphis in our AAC preview. Because
you're all in on that now, huh?
Well, because Patrick Taylor's a beast. Like, I forgot, honestly, that Patrick Taylor was still there as their lead running back, considering Henderson and Pollard left.
Right.
But their whole offense ran around all three of those guys. And what it really ran around was, my God, the holes that offensive line created. And now
the offensive line was stupid.
It was insane. And now three of those offensive linemen are gone. And I feel as soon as there weren't a ton of holes, Patrick Taylor was completely shut down, and so was Darrell Henderson the rest of the game. I feel totally confident in what I said before. So now I feel even better about how we previewed the AAC. And you're welcome for getting about 3 minutes into this and not talking about the Pac-12 and only talking about UCF. I feel pretty good about it.
I mean, I don't know really how to make a transition, but let's just jump right into the let's just jump right into the first team in the Pac-12.
Let's do it.
Arizona. I mean, this is a good way, I guess. Kevin Sumlin was rumored to be a potential UCF coach whenever he had left Texas A&M, and we were looking for a Scott Frost replacement. So funny how things kind of go full circle, right? It was expected that, that first year of Khalil Tate and Kevin Sumlin was going to be just, Heisman Trophy level kind of production, right? Because, I mean, that's what we saw. And he only played like 10 games that first year as a starter, and he was running for like 300 yards a game. And it just didn't click at the beginning of last season. And it sort of started to come along towards the end. And he only ran for 224 yards last season, which was
crazy.
Which was strange considering his first three starts, he ran for over 200 yards in each of those games. So he's got to get better completion percentage-wise. Only completed 56% of his passes last year, but was pretty good at, not turning the ball over. 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. They have an all Pac-12 running back and J.J. Taylor coming back. So there's a lot to like on offense, especially if Tate can kind of take steps to be the player that we saw 2 years ago, while also kind of meshing that new kind of passing game that Kevin Sumlin likes to bring in with his quarterbacks. But the defense was just so bad last year.
Right.
But luckily, and we've said this about a lot of teams, because, when you have a bad defense, it's normally because you're playing a lot of young guys, right?
Right.
And that's what they did. And now they're bringing back a top 10 amount of production to their defense, and a lot of, Colin Schooler at linebacker, who was a beast last year in the middle, right? their linebacking core is a lot of experience. So, I mean, you should expect some improvement. This should be a bowl team, right?
Oh yeah, I would be absolutely shocked if this wasn't a bowl team. And like their schedule isn't favorable, but
Their out of conference schedule is nice for
yeah,
them.
yeah, no,
Although
it's good.
Hawaii, they could go lose to Hawaii in week 1.
I don't think that they will, and if they do, then that
Right.
sends this season on a different path than what we're anticipating beforehand here. The thing with Arizona is everything that you just mentioned lines up for a team to make a really significant bounce back of the season. So they started 5-7, and last year rather they were 5-7
Right.
last year. And so when you look at this team and you see Khalil Tate, a guy that had Heisman buzz going into last
Right.
season, the guy with a tremendous skill set. You bring back a running back that has a lot of experience and is super, super talented. And like you just mentioned, you're bringing back so much of your defense that while they weren't very good, you're bringing back so much of it, like you said, top 10 in terms of production that you're actually bringing back
Right.
that you feel like in year 2 under Kevin Sumlin, like in having a chance to be under a head coach for the second time around, he knows what his strengths and weaknesses of his players are, as opposed to and that's the biggest thing when you go from year 1 to year 2. So from year 1 to year 2, the biggest jump that you often see is you've implemented the scheme the first year, and you're going to make a significant theoretical improvement that first year. Sometimes it's a regression. That's what we saw with Khalil Tate in a way. He regressed under Kevin Sumlin.
Yeah.
But what you see in a year 1 versus year 2 is oftentimes now it's okay, I've implemented my scheme, but now I can adjust my scheme to my player's skill set as well. Because what you do when you come in as a new head coach is it's all about, culture and scheme and this is the way we're going to do things now. You're seeing it at the NFL right now with like the Browns and the Raiders and their, Kitchens and Gruden and their, it's all about toughness. But you come in, you implement your scheme, and in year 1, sometimes that clicks right away. But most of the time it takes till year 2 once you've now adjusted to the players you have. And what the good news for Kevin Sumlin in Arizona is a Heisman-level skill quarterback, a guy that's
a guy that we've seen perform at a very high level.
Exactly. And so we've seen him perform at a high level.
Levels, really,
a running back that can do the same thing, and so much of your defense coming back. So you would expect a significant jump from Arizona. Like
I put in here, do you think they could push for 8 wins?
Oh, I definitely think they could push for 8 wins. The problem is when you do look at their schedule, their roadmap to get there is kind of tough. They've got their rivalry game is on the road at Arizona State. They're at Oregon, who's one of the best teams in this conference. They're at USC and Stanford. I mean, like you could almost pencil in 3 losses out of those 4 right there, and that's what's really tough. Are they really going to win every single game at home? Probably not. They've got Washington at home. That's not an easy game. They've got Texas Tech at home, which is a weird shootout. So I think they'll definitely be a bowl team, and they should be at the very least like pushing to try to get to 8 wins. If they had an 8-win season, that would be a really solid season in year 2 for Kevin Sumlin.
And people are forgetting how good of a coach Kevin Sumlin is. I think that's getting lost. Kevin Sumlin is one of the best coaches in the country.
He gets kind of a weird rap, and I think a lot of that has to do with Johnny Manziel.
I mean, look at his success record with quarterbacks. He coached Case Keenum, who's one of the most successful college quarterbacks of all time.
Guys still
coached Johnny Manziel.
He
made Kenny Hill a 3-time September Heisman Trophy winner, right? Like it's just incredible what he can do with quarterbacks who understand his system. And so there's question marks up front along the offensive line, but you're right. This is a bowl team. And honestly, we can go into their in-state rival now with Arizona State.
Right.
Arizona State last year had this first season under Herm Edwards that I thought Arizona was going to have under Kevin Sumlin.
Exactly.
Right? And so now we take a step back. Manny Wilkins is gone, who was a very, very underrated quarterback last year for Arizona State. Mm-hmm. N'Keal Harry, first-round wide receiver who made a lot of plays for them last year in close games, is gone. They beat Michigan State last year, which a lot of people forget.
Right, I forgot about that. That was early.
They lose so much on offense, but they're another team that brings back so much on defense that, you have questions about the offense, but can the defense keep them at a bowl level? And can Herm even – I made a lot of jokes about Herm Edwards last year. I'm not going to – I made a lot, and he proved me wrong. But I don't see it this year, man. Like they start off easy with Kent State and Sacramento State. But you're returning a quarterback who was very, very good. Like, you didn't hear about him a lot because he's playing in the Pac-12 for Arizona State, right? But Manny Wilkins was steady, man.
Yeah.
He's good on third down, made a lot of plays.
He was the
The
perfect
Pac-12 South is just so open though. Like you could see any of these teams making a push.
Well, he was the perfect big Pac-12 quarterback, mostly because he was just steady. Like so many of these guys are totally volatile quarterbacks. Like the reason that they were able to get to 7 wins is not because they necessarily implemented this incredible scheme or like they were really that much more talented than anybody else that wasn't a bowl team. It had a lot more to do with just being steady. They didn't turn the ball over very much. You know, they were a team that, like you said, you could rely on that quarterback to just not make mistakes. And now, where you're bringing in a new quarterback, and yes, you bring back a lot on defense, which under Herm Edwards, I guess that's probably a good thing. But I do have my concerns about Arizona State just because it almost felt fluky last year, like because they won some
in a way, yeah. Because
well,
I was joking that they'll win 2 games, right? And they won 7.
Right. And not only that, but like it's not like you ever watched them and were like, oh yeah, that's the more talented team. Like even when they were winning games, you didn't feel like they were necessarily
unless they were playing Oregon State.
Sure. Right. But against the teams that were around that mid-tier level in the Pac-12, which is not necessarily a great one, I just never felt like they were this team that should have been winning as much as they did. And so to be able to do what they did and go win 7 games was kind of a surprise. How do you capitalize on that? Like, are you a team that can now keep that up? Is Herm Edwards really going to out coach, the rest of these teams? And like, I think you and I have sort of always been on the same page when it comes to coaching that like at the end of the day, if you don't have talent, you're not going to win. But at the same time in college, that's a different thing. Like a coach can out coach, out prepare against other coaches. There is a significant drop off within leagues. And so it sort of feels like it's going to come down to that. Like how good is Herm Edwards, which is so weird, right? Like what a weird question to be asking.
And here's the thing, right? They fired Todd Graham because he won 7 games a season, right? He was basically like the Bo Pelini of the Pac-12. Like he was a solid coach. He'd win you 7 to 8 games, but that was all you were getting, right?
Yep.
And so they got rid of him and they brought Herm in. But like, isn't 7 to 8 games good? Like, wouldn't you, if you're Arizona State, isn't that what you would take? But I will say this. They bring back all 5 of their starters on the offensive line are seniors.
Big, huge.
They bring back a running back who was very solid last year. Eno Benjamin, I believe his name is.
Yeah.
And the defense was good last year. Strangely enough, they didn't give up a lot of points, but they did give up a lot of yards. So maybe that regresses to the mean a little bit, right?
Right.
But they're good and they're young, and they're still young. So it's interesting. They should be a bowl team, right?
Right. I would think they'll be basic.
And I could see Arizona or Arizona State pushing for the Pac-12 South because who knows what UCLA or USC is going to be, right?
Right. Well, that's the thing. Those two teams are, and we'll get to that in a second, but those two teams are so hit or miss that, like, you're right. Arizona State or Arizona could make that push. I think Arizona State's going to be just about the same. Like,
because let's be real. Let's be real, right? The Pac-12 was kind of like when they established their conferences or like the sides of the conference, right? It was a lot in the same vein of how the ACC was, where the ACC was set up with Florida State and Miami on opposite sides because the assumption was those two teams will always be meeting in the conference championship. Right. Or, Clemson was kind of figured into that equation as well, right? Yep. But then in the Pac-12, it's the same thing where the South, you have USC or UCLA, and then the North, you would always expect Washington or Oregon to come out, right?
Yep.
And so – but it's not set up like that because UCLA and USC have been so bad.
Right. They took such a giant
it gives these teams maybe even a false sense of hope where there's this 4 or 5 year window where, hey, we could win the conference.
Right.
So if you're going to do it, now is the time to do it.
I don't think Arizona State's the team to do it this year. I think they're going to be just about the same. 7 and 6.
Fair enough. I was just throwing it out there.
No. You're not. It's totally right to throw it out there because that actually sets us up well for the rest of this preview to understand that basically at this point anybody can win this conference on either side. To be quite frank, I mean obviously
I think Washington's really good. I will get to them, but yeah.
But that's the big thing is that like knowing that the Pac-12 is very strange and that, like you said,
Pac-12 after
and
dark,
for
baby.
that matter, well, yes, which is the best. Like, as much as we hate on the Pac-12,
That's the most sensual version of football.
oh yeah, Pac-12 after dark.
Nothing like watching Oregon State play Arizona State at 3 a.m.
We're watching football at night.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, moving on to California. Cal,
This is a good team.
Please tell me why.
Chase Garbers is back at quarterback. I like him a lot.
Mhm.
Defense was incredible last year. Absolutely incredible. And like I said last week when we talked about them playing TCU in that bowl game,
Yeah,
I think it was the Sun Bowl, they put on an absolute clinic defensively. And I know that TCU is not like any hot stuff offensively, but their defense is going to be even better this year, and they were a top 25 defense last season, right?
right.
And the offense is going to get better. Chase Garbers is back as a redshirt sophomore after playing as a freshman last year. Duncan Jordan is a good senior leadership wide receiver, right? They lose their leading receiver and some of their leading wide receivers, but with an experienced quarterback coming back and Justin Wilcox being in his second season as the head coach, I really, really like Cal. Do I think they're going to win the conference? It's tough because they're in the Pac-12 North, right?
Right.
That road game against Washington will be super, super interesting.
Yeah.
Because I think that's a strength-on-strength matchup where Washington will have questions now at on offense with Jake Browning gone, but Jacob Eason is there, right? So you expect them to take a leap in terms of offensive production. But their defense, I mean, Washington quietly has been just one of the best NFL factories in terms of defensive players.
Isn't that weird?
Since Chris Peterson got there, right?
Yeah, isn't that weird? This is something I've been thinking about, or not. I mean, not like
there's so many Washington
right
defensive players in the NFL
They're
right now.
everywhere, and all of a sudden, I'm just every time that you turn on a game like Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, when the guys are introducing themselves, every single team has a guy on defense from Washington. I don't know how that happened. Out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's like Washington, Alabama, Ohio State, and Clemson. You hear it.
That's it.
Yep. And it's weird because it's on all levels of the defense, right? Where it's like they're putting out good defensive linemen and also good secondary play. It's mostly in the secondary, right? Yeah. But But going back to Cal, this is a team I think could win 8 to 9 games. Honestly.
Yeah. So
I really like them a lot. I really do.
I don't disagree with what you have to say about their positives, right? Like that defense is legit.
Their defense is going to win them a lot of games in this conference.
Yes, because like we just talked about before with Arizona State, volatility at quarterback, quarterbacks that are not very consistent. You start with Khalil Tate. For that matter, Jacob Eason, we know nothing about with Washington. Like, as much as we all like to think
we know he's got a lot of talent.
We know he's got a ton of talent, but he got beat out at Georgia. By
Jake Fromm, who's going to be a
great quarterback, but still, I mean, like anytime a guy has to transfer and go start over again, there is a little bit, not necessarily concern, but like, you're in a spot where you don't know that much about him, and so as I look up and down this conference, I say, all right, Cal's defense is going to do some damage, but this is the first time I'm sort of going to go schedule hunting here, like legitimately.
Okay.
When I look down their schedule and I see that they have to play Washington on the road, Oregon on the road, Utah on the road, Stanford on the road.
Going all the way to Ole Miss is bad too.
Going to Ole Miss, I think they're better than Ole Miss, but they'll
slap Ole Miss, but that's a weird road trip.
It's a weird travel to then come back and play Arizona State and then go to Oregon. Like their schedule is just brutal in terms of and also strange teams. Like in a row, you go at Washington and then home against Mason Fine in North Texas, who are just going to try to.
That's gonna be a fun game.
That's going to be a crazy game because that's the same deal. When you talk strength on strength, like they got to go play Jacob Eason, right? Jacob Eason and then Mason Fine. Good God, man. Mm-hmm. Like you got to,
and then they get to rest against Ole Miss because Ole Miss is going to be a garbage fire.
But how weird is that we're saying they get to rest when they're on the road at an SEC school? Like that's not really resting. So my concern is that with all of the travel and some of the weird matchups, and some of the weird parts, like that, those 3 games in a row, weeks 2, 3, and 4, are just weird. And like they could win all 3, because they've got this unbelievable defense, and normally, we all know that defense sort of travels better than offense does a lot of the time. At the same time, man, they could lose all three. Like Mason Fine's an NFL level quarterback.
They legitimately their toughest games are all on the road too. Washington, Oregon, Utah, Stanford, and UCLA are all
right. And so, as we've talked about in the first 4 conference previews, when you're one of those teams that's looking to make the jump from middle to the top, you wish that your toughest games would be at home, because then you could go on the road and beat the easy teams and then stay at home and have a chance to beat the best teams. And that's not necessarily how it shakes out for Cal. While I think they will be a significantly better team than they were last year, I still don't think that their record totally reflects that. Like, I think they could get to 8 wins, but it's going to be really tough to do so. Like, if they get to 8 wins, I'd be really impressed, just because that schedule is so bizarre.
Well, eligibility for sure, though.
Oh, that's 100%. Yeah, like like you mentioned, this is a really good football team. Like, for all of the reasons that you talked about, and when you have that good of a defense in this conference, you're going to win 6 games. Period.
Yep.
But it's going to be a struggle to do much more than that, just based off of the fact that all of those games are on the road, and we really have a hard time knowing exactly what all of those teams are going to be, especially at the quarterback position.
Right. So let's move on to this team. Really interests me. I don't know how you feel about them, but Colorado. And I'm going to tell you why. Mel Tucker is coming over now as the head coach from Georgia. He was the defensive coordinator those first couple Kirby Smart years, and he unarguably did an incredible job at Georgia. He was on the Alabama staff with Kirby Smart before then, and he has a lot of NFL coaching experience. He was the interim head coach for the Jaguars in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
After Jack Del Rio had gotten fired, so a lot of experience. He seems like from all reports, like he's like a player's coach, where the guys really, really like playing for him.
Yeah.
And he's just an incredible recruiter, right? And it can't be hard to recruit people to come to Colorado.
No.
It's just a beautiful campus, right?
Right.
And so they really, really interest me. And this year, like, it's his first year, but it's not like he's got doesn't have a lot to work with. Right. Steven Montez is back as a senior quarterback who has legit, like, NFL caliber talent. He's got an absolute cannon. He can kind of move a little bit. And they have possibly the most talented receiver in the country with Laviska Shenault.
Right.
Who is an absolute stud. Like, if you've not seen him play, he's like, when they talk about a dude, he's a dude.
That's a dude. Right.
Yeah, 100% a dude.
Yeah.
They lose Trevon McMillan, but they've been really good at producing running backs these last couple of years. So, there's some youth along the offensive line. The offense is going to be interesting because they have Shenault and Montez, right?
Well, right, but that's sort of the big connection that I think can carry them a little bit here. And not even necessarily that Shenault is, he's a dude, so he's going to get his, but the attention that he draws because of being that talented, because of being that impactful, should open up the rest of the offense, should help the running game, should help other receivers get open, especially like tight ends over the middle. And so you would think that the offense will produce at a level with those guys coming back that would be, a step up from last year. Not necessarily like crazy different, but a step up, because you have a beast of a wide receiver coming back with a quarterback that was pretty productive. They were a team that wasn't bowl eligible last year. You would think that just based off paper, based off of the factors that we're talking about, that this team should get to bowl eligibility. Do I think they'll be much better than that? Probably not. It's the first year under a new head coach. It's bringing back a quarterback and wide receiver that impact the game. But like you mentioned, the rest of the team is solid.
So they bring their 2 best players back on offense and defense, right? Because on defense, they bring back Mustafa Johnson on the line and Nate Landman at linebacker. And they're both really, really good players, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to be interesting because everything else is where it kind of gets cloudy, like you were talking about.
Right.
That game against Nebraska in week 2 will tell us a lot about both teams. So I'm that's something to be excited about. But we can move on to the next team, which I think is. Go ahead.
Let me just say the Nebraska-Colorado game was a great game last year, if you guys remember.
Yeah.
That was a shoot.
It's a rivalry game, too.
Yeah.
A lot of people forget that that's a rivalry.
Old school rivalry game. And it's always fun to watch Scott Frost and his team go up against black and gold. Moving to Oregon.
Yeah, so opening the season with that 2012 title rematch against Auburn on a neutral site, which will be interesting. I think Oregon should win that game, right?
Yeah, for sure. They should. I don't think Auburn's that good. I mean, they're good. Hold on.
They
Rewind.
got a lot of question marks with quarterback and
Yes.
whatnot.
Auburn is good. Oregon, I know. Like, I know what Oregon is. I'm also a Mario Cristobal stan. Shout
I
out
was
to
gonna say, where do
Toledo.
you stand on a sneaky Oregon national playoff
Yeah, I
contender?
mean, like, there's no reason that they couldn't. So, like, here's a weird thing that I'm going to say. I think they're the only team out of the Pac-12 that could go to the playoff.
I don't disagree.
They're the only team because of because they're Oregon. So, like, I know that's a weird statement, but Cristobal got some strange hype last year. And also, if you guys remember, the weird scenario where when Miami didn't have a coach for like 4 days before they convinced Manny Diaz to come back from Temple.
Right.
RIP Manny Diaz, the Temple head coach. Mario Cristobal was linked because Mario Cristobal used to coach at FIU down here in Miami.
Right.
And then went out to Oregon and I believe he was the offensive line coach. And then when they
Mm-hmm.
fired Mark Hurlick, he took over as the interim, and then they hired him full time.
Right.
And the players seem to absolutely love Mario Cristobal.
Yeah.
And when you bring back Justin Herbert, who is possibly the first overall pick in the NFL draft next year. When
Right.
you bring back a quarterback that's that talented, who, if he would have left, would have probably been a top 5 pick.
And it's not like he's just going to be the first overall pick because he's got like the measurables or
No, he
whatever. He's
played well.
legitimately a stud, right?
Yeah, no, and he played well. He wasn't last year. I think actually was strangely a down year. Like,
And he was hurt a lot last year.
yeah, it was just like a kind of strange season, and they still went
Still
9.
finished with 29 touchdowns and 8
Yeah, and
interceptions.
so that's the thing that I think that Justin Herbert is going to be outrageous this year. If he stays healthy, in another again, I'm the way that they operate that offense, the way that he can play within that system, the way that they'll tailor everything to his skill set. I think that offense could go kind of nuts this year, especially not even necessarily in terms of like their scoring offense being, the number 1 team in the country.
Yeah,
Because
like the Chip Kelly era Oregon,
right,
right?
it's not. I'm not even necessarily talking about that. I'm talking more in terms of efficiency. Like, he
Right.
doesn't
They
really
were
turn the
still a
ball
top
over.
30 offense last year, right?
Right. Yeah, no, they're still going to be really, really solid. And so I think Oregon is not necessary. It's not a sneaky favorite to win the Pac-12 North, but like I think they definitely could win the Pac-12 North without much of an issue.
Gotcha. I agree. I really like this team. Underrated. They bring in Kevon Thibodeau, the number 1 overall prospect in the
Right.
country, and it's not very often you see a team like Oregon kind of pull that off.
Mm-hmm.
So Cristobal's obviously recruiting very well. And they were a top 30 offense and a top 50 defense last year. They lost 4 games, but I believe all 4 games they lost was games that Herbert was
Yeah.
injured for.
Yeah.
So it's just going to be about being more consistent overall. They got their leading rusher back, their best defensive player, Troy Dye is back at linebacker. There's a lot to like here, and especially with the question marks surrounding Stanford and Washington.
Right.
And even Washington State was great in the Pac-12 North last year, but it's like they're,
And there's no Gardner Minshew.
on. So like,
Yeah.
can you recreate that magic? So
Right. I will say, the weird part of check out Oregon's schedule. Like, just take a look at it. They only have 4 road games, and all
Yep.
4 of them are kind of weird. Like, it's Stanford, Washington, USC, and Arizona State. Those are all tough road games.
Yep.
But they only have 4 road games, and none of them are back to back.
USC.
Well,
When we get to USC, you'll see where I feel about USC.
it's still going to USC, right?
Oh, the Coliseum, yeah.
That's weird. I said weird. I didn't say tough. I said weird.
Yeah, weird.
You know,
Right.
it's a weird road game going to the Coliseum. Shut up. Oregon. My point was that they only play 4 road games, though. Like,
right.
They have this whole schedule. They play 4 games.
Technically, the Auburn one is a neutral site, but yeah.
You know what I'm saying here, man.
Mm-hmm.
4 true road games where they won't have the home field advantage of Oregon, and that's it. Only 4 of them, and with those 4, like, yes, obviously. Stanford's tough and Washington's tough. But like you just said, USC and Arizona State should be teams that Oregon doesn't have that much of an issue with.
But those are teams that they have struggled with in recent years, and that's been the difference in them, separating themselves in conference.
And
whereas Washington has been winning those games.
That's exactly what I was just about to go to.
Yep.
You read my mind. Is
We're on the same wavelength.
if they can do that this year, they're going to win the conference.
Yep.
If they struggle in the same way that they have basically since the Chip Carey era ended, then they're going to be the same team.
Yep.
And so that's going to be the huge difference is how do they do in those road games against – I'm not necessarily concerned about how they're doing in the road games against the teams that are, bang, bang, right there head to head. It's actually more against the teams that they should beat and see what they can do there.
All right, let's move to their in-state rival who hasn't been exciting for a while. They had the Sean Mannion, Brandon Cooks season a couple years ago. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Of course, Brandon Cooks showing out.
Yeah. Sean Mannion was still in the NFL for a long period of time, which is weird.
Shout out Kaepernick.
I will say this about Oregon State. Jonathan Smith is interesting as a head coach, especially in terms of his offensive identity.
Okay.
Right. If any team pulls somebody off the Chris Peterson coaching tree, I'm automatically intrigued.
I know how much you love you some Chris Peterson.
Oh, I love Chris Peterson. Such a weird guy. But they kind of did what I think a lot of coaches at downtrodden programs like this should do. Instead of aiming to get junior college guys in last year,
right?
Smith brought it he just went for just full on youth movement, and you see that where they bring back they're third in defensive returning production, only 73rd on offense, which is a bit of a problem. But Jamar Jefferson and Isaiah Hodgins are both very young, productive players back on offense.
Jamar Jefferson's very good. Very good.
Yeah, especially as a sophomore. He averaged 6 yards per carry and had 12 touchdowns, right?
He's a stud.
On a team that was awful. And so
he still did that.
It'll be interesting to see how that youth comes along this year. That being said, there's only one game on this schedule I'm confident they will win against Cal Poly.
Yeah.
Right. They could lose big to Hawaii if things don't go their way, because Hawaii is legitimately one of the more exciting group of 5 teams to watch.
I love Hawaii's good. That's my favorite.
Oh yeah, it's awesome, right?
You know who my favorite college football other than Mackenzie Milton, my favorite college football player of all time?
Colt Brennan
is that was the first when we were kids.
Timmy Chank guy.
Oh, come on, man. Colt Brennan. That was the first time. Not the first time, but that was when I really first started looking at college football on a national level and not just teams here in Florida. And then obviously North Carolina because I was a weirdo North Carolina fan. But that was I remember when Colt Brennan was the thing. And a couple things about Colt Brennan, just because we're here. We're not talking about Hawaii and any of the other ones, so I might as well do this now. Colt Brennan, I'll never forget watching them get absolutely smashed in the Sugar Bowl.
Yep.
To Georgia, just annihilated.
It's funny because that was around the same time that Cincinnati got slapped by Florida. Remember that? Yeah,
exactly. And it was just.
And that was Tony Pike. Remember Tony Pike?
Oh my God, yeah. And
I was so mad when the Jaguars didn't draft him. He ended up being a 5th-round pick for the Panthers, and he just ended up not having it.
And so to go from there, so Colt Brennan ultimately ended up on the Lions. And so I remember that was back when Megatron was still with the Lions. And so I used to, in Madden, I would go every time that I would play. Every time I'd play Madden, I'd be who were bad, the terrible Detroit Lions.
They were awful, yeah.
But all I would do is I'd throw Colt Brennan in at quarterback, and I'd throw bombs to Calvin Johnson, and Calvin Johnson would have 500 yards receiving, and Colt Brennan would be unstoppable because the one thing that he was really good at was he threw a pretty deep ball. So they gave him this unbelievable deep ball accuracy, and then he had Megatron, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
And shout out Colt Brennan in Hawaii. But you're right, Hawaii could
that's
be
our
Oregon State. Yeah, that's our Oregon State preview as we talk only about Hawaii. But yeah, I mean,
all right.
Just to finish that real quick. I'm
go ahead.
Because they could take again a step forward in terms of how they play, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to reflect in their record. They're probably still going to be 2-10.
They're still very, very undermanned,
and they're very young. They're very young. It's going to take still a couple of years before they're on any sort of wavelength toward.
Because obviously it can be built, right? Like their in-state rival is perennially a national title contender, right?
Exactly.
So it's obvious that the resources can be there. They don't have the Nike money, right? But
No, but they could be something.
Right. Let's move on to Stanford.
I know they have one loss on their schedule.
Yeah. I mean, it is tough coming all the way to Orlando, though. Let's be real. Like, coming all the way to Orlando from Palo Alto,
yeah,
that's going to be tough, especially because it's going to be a wild environment, right?
Oh, it's going to be nuts.
KJ Costello's a beast, though. Got to give him credit. KJ Costello is one of the more slept-on quarterbacks, I feel like, in the country.
What is Stanford?
Probably a 9-10 win team.
Again, just over and over.
David Shaw's awesome, man. I love David Shaw.
He's awesome. And
if they can rebuild their defense, though,
they're so damn disciplined.
If they could get it back to like late era Jim Harbaugh defense,
yeah,
or early David Shaw defense, and KJ Costello brings the offense along as he probably will. Although they do lose Arcega-Whiteside, who's a beast last year, just absolute stud. And, Bryce Love's gone, but he had the one
he barely played
Cinderella season and then basically became injury prone.
Yeah.
They get Oregon and Washington at home.
Yeah, that's huge.
They could win the conference.
Yeah.
Which would be great for UCF if UCF happens to beat them, right?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. That's what we've talked about. We said it in the AAC preview. Like, I need Stanford to lose to UCF and then win every single game. Like,
yes, 100%.
I need Stanford to be 11-1 and win the Pac-12. So Stanford, please listen. They are weird, right? So that's the thing about the Pac-12. I'm just going to keep with the same theme. They got a quarterback, and they got a quarterback that doesn't turn the ball over very much. And they've got a coach that always has his team playing very disciplined football. And, I feel very confident in – oh, gosh. Sorry, I'm getting a couple of Jesus Christ.
You're blowing up
here. No, I need that to stop. I don't know how to turn that off on my computer.
Weird.
Trying to figure it out. I'll delete this. But nonetheless. But yeah, KJ Costello is like, oh my God.
Don't worry about it, man. It's not a big deal.
I'm putting it on Do Not Disturb. But yeah, all right. So KJ Costello is like a legitimate, really good quarterback. Like you said, he's a top 10 quarterback in the country. Maybe he's even as good as top 5. And the thing that really is going to be such a benefit to them is the fact that he's always going to be there and steady. And so when you get your toughest games at home and you've got a quarterback that you can rely on,
and a weapon that he relies on, and Colby Parkinson being back at tight end,
exactly. Well, and Stanford, for how many years have we watched Stanford run the ball up the middle and then throw 3rd and 4 little button hooks to the tight end,
who then break it off for they've had just freaks at tight end too.
Forever. Yeah. I mean, it was back with Kobe Fleener.
Mm-hmm.
These guys that you can rely on that are steady. And that's something that how often in college football do we get to say that you just have a really, really, really steady team? I'm not concerned about one facet of the game for them. And that does, as a UCF fan, that obviously concerns me. But traveling all the way to Orlando to a crazy environment to face a very talented team is going to be tough for them. But their actual we stick in conference. Because Northwestern's not an easy game either. Northwestern coming to your house.
The Nerd
Bowl, that's fun. But that's not necessarily an easy game. UCF's not an easy game. Notre Dame is.
Kudos to them for scheduling like that out of conference.
They have a really tough out of conference schedule. Northwestern, UCF, and Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
And I know Notre Dame's a historic matchup for them, but still, they're doing it right.
I think they're better than Notre Dame this year. To be honest.
I actually agree with you, which is very funny because Notre Dame's preseason top 10. But Stanford could sneaky, where I said Oregon's the team that could get to the playoff. Stanford could be a sneaky top 10 finish.
Gun to your head, are you taking KJ Costello or Ian Book?
Ooh.
I think I'd take Costello.
I think I'm taking Costello too.
Yeah,
I think Ian Book's a little overrated.
It's the Notre Dame shine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fine. Whatever.
He's good.
He's good.
We've talked about Notre Dame already.
Oh, God. All right, but yeah. So Stanford. What are your thoughts here, man? Like, so what? Finally, we've thrown out like, oh, they could be this, they could be that. Having those games at home, having to only play like Oregon State, Colorado, Washington State
It's
on the
so
road.
annoying too, right? Because the Pac-12 North is so competitive,
Yeah.
and the Pac-12 South is basically a garbage fire.
Yeah.
So it's annoying that that only one of Oregon, Washington, or Stanford
Right.
can
Those are
make
the
the
three
conference
best
championship
teams. Those are the three best teams.
because those are the best three teams in the conference.
Yes.
So, I mean, I could see any of those three teams winning the conference, honestly. But Stanford has the advantage, and they have a proven commodity at quarterback. I mean, Oregon does too, obviously, right? But they have
The home schedule.
I trust David Shaw more than I trust Mario Cristobal, and they get Oregon and Washington at home. So
Huge.
that's just massively important, right?
Yeah.
So I really like Stanford this year, honestly.
Yeah, I
I
think
didn't think I would, and I really like Paulson Abeto at corner.
Yeah, I think the thing with Stanford, and I didn't really think about it until we just sat here and started having this conversation. But like, if the three best teams are Stanford, Washington, and Oregon, and Stanford gets both of the other two toughest teams at home, that's a gigantic advantage that could lead them simply based off home field advantage to a conference championship. Like, because losing to UCF means nothing. Like, if they go lose to UCF, that means literally
that's
nothing.
whatever. Yeah, it's not a conference game.
Right, it means nothing.
Then they just have to hope UCF wins the rest of their games.
Right. If they're looking at like, if we're talking about like college football playoff type hopes.
Oh, for a fact though, if
I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this.
Loses to UCF and then wins out, and UCF wins out, Stanford would still get into the playoff over UCF 100%.
I'm saying it right now. I'm threatening lives right here on this YouTube channel.
Whatever hotel they vote for the playoff.
Whatever hotel that they go to for the playoff, I will send a very strongly worded letter to that hotel should Stanford get in at 11-1, losing to UCF with an undefeated UCF. I will send a very strong letter. There will be profanity, and it will be very strong, lots of finger wagging. Don't do that, please. God, I don't think I could take it. All right, UCLA, Chip Kelly.
I'll say this. If they come out and win against Cincinnati on the road in week 1, then we're going to be talking about an interesting team.
Heck yeah, we will.
Caleb Wilson's gone at tight end.
Yeah.
He's a security blanket, so other guys have to step up. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I mean, at quarterback, he's what Chip Kelly wants, right?
He's silly talented. He's silly talented.
And there was some weird stuff last year between Dorian Thompson-Robinson's dad and Chip Kelly for some reason.
It's been a very weird, tumultuous time in the last half.
But think about what we were talking about. Yeah, think about what we were talking about last year when Kelly got hired at UCLA. We're like, holy shit, like that. Like they beat out Florida for him.
Yeah.
And so like, man, Chip Kelly's gonna kill it at UCLA. Like he has experience in the West Coast already, especially already in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
And they came out and laid an egg, right? 3-9.
They were awful.
But they started to kind of put it together at the end of the season, right? Once they realized, hey, Wilton Spade is not a viable option to play quarterback in college football. Mostly because of his neck, but also, I don't know what it is here.
I'm indifferent.
I think they could get to a bowl game, and that would be huge, right? That would be a huge improvement. But Cincinnati, San Diego State, and Oklahoma being their out-of-conference schedule is not very helpful.
Right.
Especially when we've talked about Arizona, California, Colorado, and Arizona State kind of being in the mid-tier in the conference, also kind of looking to improve.
Right.
It creates a strange-looking roadmap for UCLA. Now, would I be surprised if they came out and Chip Kelly had them like looking like an absolute force? Mm-hmm. Maybe not a force, but like a team that could threaten for the Pac-12 South title, especially with how up in the air it is. I wouldn't be surprised, and I would actually
South
love to see that.
The Pac-12 South reminds me a little bit of the
Big Ten,
Big Ten
West.
Yeah, where it's like literally just throw names at a dartboard, and any single one of them could theoretically win the conference. I don't feel that confident about UCLA. Like I used to be a huge Chip Kelly guy. I was like all in on Chip Kelly when he was at Oregon. They were super fun and they were different. The thing is now it's like he made this huge impact on college football as a coach,
Mm-hmm.
and nothing has changed for him since, and everybody's caught up. Because
Mm-hmm.
everybody, I mean, we're talking about teams like, I remember we talked about Tulane, where they're like the hybrid between the spread and the option, and like Chip Kelly's offense looks exactly the same as it's looked forever. And even, for that matter, disciples like Scott Frost that took it and tweaked it.
Right, just a
And
little bit. Put
and
their own spin on it.
it's all been, and so there's so many guys out there,
But
so many teams out there, so many programs.
what's strange about Chip Kelly, and the reason I think you could expect some sort of improvement, is that it's not just the offensive system for him. It's the way that it's the culture he sets, right?
Yeah.
You hear the things about sleep monitoring. He does the sleep monitoring with the players.
Yeah.
He does really strange like hydration tests, and it's state of the art type sciencey shit, right? And so like they practice differently than other teams. Like, so those are the sorts of things that it becomes the difference in a year or two, right? Where the guys are getting adjusted to that, because that's a huge like life shift in general.
Yes.
And so getting used to like a whole second year in that could look entirely different.
I think the offense
such a weird X factor.
Well, I think the offense will be significantly better than last season. I think now that you have a quarterback that's like gotten a full year as the starter to like really learn that offense, that's a big, 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 big deal. And the kid's immensely talented. The offense is going to score a lot of points. I still don't necessarily think they're going to be bowl eligible. I still think that like and maybe I'm wrong. I hope
someone's going to miss a bowl in the conference.
Right. I hope that I'm wrong, because Chip Kelly teams being good is fun. Period. Like when Chip Kelly teams are good, that's fun for college football, because that means there's a lot of points being scored. That being said, I still think they're sort of a year away from being legitimately competitive in their conference. That's all it is. It's not that they're going to be bad. It's just that they're not quite as good as some of these other middle tier teams, and so they're going to have to. Somebody has to fall off, and I think it's probably UCLA.
And seemingly, like every other like weird team in this conference, they have a lot back on defense.
Right.
So, I mean, we'll see.
Yeah.
Let's move on to their in-state rival, though.
Yeah.
Garbage fire of the century, USC. This is the year Clay Helton gets fired.
Yep.
This is it. They're gonna honestly.
We've been waiting for it.
Honestly, I love Graham Harrell. I know you're a huge Graham Harrell guy.
I am a Graham Harrell stan.
So
I love Graham Harrell, and their offense is going to be wild under him, which is he'll be.
Amon-Ra St. Brown, was like a number 1 overall player last year as a wide receiver.
Yeah.
In terms of recruiting, they bring in Brew McCoy, who transferred. Like, went to USC, transferred to Texas, and then transferred back to USC, all in his first offseason as a college football player. And Michael Pittman Jr. is a stud at wide receiver as well.
Yeah, dude.
JT Daniels sucked last year.
He did.
And I'm not even going to – he was bad, right? So it opened up the quarterback competition between him and Jack Sears. Whichever one of them wins the job will have no excuses, because those are – freaks playing wide receiver, like 3 legitimately, like just freaks of nature. And so Graham Harrell, we all know air raid, right? Like it's going to be fun on offense.
My guy.
The defense was average last year. It was pretty good, right?
Fine.
They lose basically all of their best players on defense. Clay Helton has not shown me anything that leads me to believe that this is going to be a successful season.
Nope.
I think the best case scenario for us personally is they start off 2-4.
Yep.
And Graham Harrell gets named the interim head coach.
This is what I'm saying. We see the vision. Check out that schedule. Fresno State, Stanford, BYU, Utah, Washington, Notre Dame. They're going 1-5, dude. Maybe they're going 2-4.
They might lose to Fresno State.
That's what I'm saying. No, that's what I'm saying. They're starting either 1-5 or 2-4 with that schedule, and then they're going to go ahead. Maybe they'll be 3-3. They're going to fire Clay Helton. They're going to promote Graham Harrell, and this program is going to take off in the direction I've been waiting for years. And I can't.
And that was the hope with Cliff, right? Is that Cliff was going to be there when Helton got fired?
Yep.
So honestly, it would be amazing. Like, if I put the over-under at like 75% that Graham Harrell is the head coach of USC at the end of this season?
Like we're going into next season? Going into next season?
Like he gets the job and then keeps it into next year. Or do you think they would open it up to like a nationwide?
No, 100% Graham Harrell's the head coach at USC in 2020.
Oh,
Book it
shit.
right here,
All right.
right now. 100% it's done. Unless he gets hired by a damn NFL team because he's that great.
I will
Graham
also say this.
Harrell.
The defense did lose a lot of talent, but they added another 5-star transfer with
They're gonna
Chris
get
Steele
smoked.
coming up. I mean, it's USC, right? They've got
USC Yeah, but USC's defense, this is the thing. This is the problem. That's
Mhm.
why Graham Harrell's going to get the job because they're going to get smoked defensively. Like they are, just straight up. They're going to get smoked defensively, but the offense will produce. Like I'm confident if it's JT Daniels and I forget the other
Jack Sears.
Yeah, Jack Sears. I apologize for that. If it's Jack Sears or JT Daniels, I'm confident that either one of those dudes is going to show out because they have so much talent on the offensive side and now a great mind behind the offense. And it's not like he's taking the offense and changing it that much. It's not like the air raid is that complicated. Hey, man, go out and sling it. And those two dudes are talented. Their receivers are out of this world. They're going to score a lot of points. USC is going to be really fun to watch because they're going to be in more shootouts than other teams in the Pac-12. Like when teams play USC this year, it's going to feel like the teams that played Washington State last year. It's going to be shootouts, but they're not going to win a lot of those games. And so that's where Clay Helton gets fired and Graham Harrell becomes the head coach savior of the century and USC goes to the college football playoff next year. All right, moving on.
All right, so this is a team that I think we've been disrespecting this whole time in terms of the Pac-12 South because we've talked about the Pac-12 South. We've talked about it like being open, right? Utah's
damn good.
Is a like it's the team that I think of the most as a reflection of its head coach, right?
Fair.
Like Utah is Kyle Whittingham's team. They're tough as shit. Like they are just rugged, right? They're going to be nasty up front on offense, and they're going to play just disgusting defense, like in-your-face defense. And on offense, they bring back – because that's been their biggest question these past couple of years is their defense has been incredible, right? Their offense is top 3 in terms of returning production. They're bringing back Tyler Huntley, who missed the last half of last season with a broken collarbone, but in 9 games was completing almost 65% of his passes – and had 12 touchdowns on top of 304 rushing yards. That's including sack yardage being subtracted and 4 touchdowns.
Right.
So he's the best quarterback that they've had in a while at Utah, right? Zach Moss, second team all Pac-12 last year at running back. That the problem is they lose 3 all Pac-12 offensive linemen.
That hurts big time.
Everybody else is back, though. So you're still returning 2 starters on offensive line. All of your playmakers are back on offense. And even with the defense lost 3 all first-team Pac-12 guys as well. Yeah. But it's Kyle Whittingham. This team is going to have a good defense.
All I'm doing while you were just talking, I was just looking at their schedule. Okay? Is it conceivable that Utah could be 8-0 heading into Washington?
100% conceivable, yeah.
They could be 8-0, and that could be a matchup of top 15 teams. Like that Washington-Utah.
It's not so long ago that Utah was. Remember, they were like top 5 for a period of time there. Was it 2 years ago?
Yeah, I mean Utah. It's this weird thing, right? Because they are in the South, right?
They're
the
tough.
South,
That's just like it's just a tough team,
right?
Like if you're playing Utah that week, you're just like, oh shit, we got to play Utah this week, like,
right? And they're gonna get
the ice bats ready.
Up. Right, exactly. And when you do look at like we just mentioned, man, the South is so volatile. Like that's the big word that I've been using all preview here is volatile. Whether it's quarterback play, whether it's teams in general, whether it's coaching, all these teams are all over the place. And Utah is not.
And you know what you're getting, yeah.
Disciplined, tough, really similar to Stanford, if we're being totally honest. But in the South, that means they could very well win the South once again. I don't. Yep. Not that
They would be my pick to win the South, right?
Right. I'm not going to say like, oh, it's definitely going to happen, but they are the pick to win it. Like it would be somewhat of a surprise if they didn't. Yeah. It would be somewhat of a surprise if they were not the team to come out because like I just said, 8-0 feels totally conceivable. And then from there, it's at Washington, home against UCLA, at Arizona, home against Colorado. Those last 3 are huge. So even if they lose to Washington, if they can go 2 out of 3 in those final couple, they're going to get there, and that's going to be a 10-win season. Like that's crazy, All right, so moving to the final 2 teams here that matter, both from Washington, and we'll start with not state, but just Washington. you're obviously very, very high on Washington for obvious reasons, and Jacob Eason, likely at the helm there. What are your thoughts on Washington and the way that they, will handle things this year out there in the Pac-12 North?
Right. So they were a top 5 defense last year. They've been a top 5 defense pretty much every year that Chris Peterson's been there. The problem is this year they are last in returning defensive production, right? They lose first team all Pac-12 defensive backs, Byron Murphy and Taylor Rapp, who were both first or second round picks in the NFL draft.
Right.
They lose first team all Pac-12 defensive linemen, Greg Gaines and Ben Burke-Hervin, right, who was a linebacker. And they also lose starting corners, JoJo Miller and another linebacker in Taylor Bartlett, right? So those guys were both all Pac-12 honorable mention. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys from your defense last year who are gone, who are all conference level talents, right?
Yeah.
But this has been a defensive factory these last couple of years. They've been recruiting very, very well on the defensive side of the ball. The problem with Washington these last couple of years has been Jake Browning being so, just inefficient, right?
Yeah.
Turning the ball over, making just strange, boneheaded plays. And now you have a former number 1 overall quarterback recruit in Jacob Eason coming into town. If it had not been for Jake Fromm existing,
he'd still be at
Georgia. Probably doing along the same lines of what Fromm was doing there.
Right.
He's the most talented quarterback Chris Peterson has ever coached. If you're talking pure talent.
Excuse me, Kellen Moore?
Kellen Moore, I love Kellen Moore.
No, I'm just screwing around. I
love Kellen Moore. Cannot even sniff the talent.
No, I know.
Has, right?
Well, that's the whole thing, man.
So that's what makes this team so intriguing to me is Jacob Eason is with an offensive coach who is probably one of the most brilliant football minds in the world, not just in college football.
And he brings the best out of quarterbacks. He does.
Imagine what he can do with Jacob Eason, right?
Yeah.
I just think that they're going to reload. This is not a team because you hear, they got to rebuild. This is a reload. They've recruited to the level where it's just a reload.
Yeah, it is. They're one of those teams. They're not quite obviously in that Alabama, Ohio State.
They're in that next tier though, for sure.
But they are
firmly in the next tier.
At this point, they are in the next tier.
And they to me are the closest to that top tier in terms of.
This preview's been kind of weird because going into it, I started when we were starting. I was like, okay, cool. So Washington's going to win the Pac-12, but what's the rest of it going to be? And then as we actually started having our conversation, I changed my mind twice, and I went, nope, Oregon's going to win the Pac-12, and then I went, nope, Stanford's going to win the Pac-12 because they have these couple games at home. And then we come back to Washington, and it makes all the sense in the world that they would win the Pac-12, which is why it's so unbelievably crappy that those 3 teams are on the same side of the Pac-12. It's like the Michigan-Ohio State thing. And for that matter,
Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State, all being in the Big Ten East. Yeah.
Right. It's crazy. And to have all those teams right here in the Pac-12 North really sucks because it's like you just.
It's like that. It's also like the SEC West, right? Bama, Auburn, LSU, Texas A&M, and then you have Florida and Georgia on the other side.
Right. And Washington's wild. Washington should be. Chris Peterson's coached some great teams. And while they lost a lot, this Washington team should be as good as any team he's ever coached because Jacob Eason's probably the best quarterback he's ever had in terms of pure talent, like you just mentioned. And they bring back.
Think about how exciting that is, dude. Chris Peterson has put together top 5, top 10 offenses. Last year, they weren't great, right? And they lost a lot in terms of offensive linemen.
Right.
But look, he's made magic out of just way less before. And now he has a guy that recruiting analysts were like, this is the best quarterback in his recruiting class.
Right.
He's
and it's not like he did anything to lose that job. Jake Fromm was just great.
Yeah.
It's not like Jacob Eason didn't,
Jacob Eason
didn't show up and crap the bed and just have a bad start at Georgia. He was really solid. It's just more in terms of Jake Fromm was a superstar that's going to be a first-round pick. So
Jacob Eason's 6'5", 227, and just has an absolute an NFL caliber arm.
He's a star. No, and that's
never had anybody like that, dude.
Yeah. Again, they don't play a tough game until they go. They don't play a tough game until they go to Stanford.
That's disrespectful to California, but yeah.
they don't play a tough game for Washington until they go to Stanford. Like, California's good. Like, that's not to say that Cal's
fair
not
enough.
good.
Fair enough.
And for that matter, Cal's a really good defense. Like, we've discussed that. Cal's a really good defense, and playing Cal week 2 when you are just getting sort of used to things, man. Like, would I be totally shocked if Washington lost to Cal? Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
No. But they do not play their toughest games until they go to Stanford. And then luckily for them, they get Oregon at home. Could Washington conceivably run the table and be a college football playoff team? Absolutely. Could Washington conceivably already have a loss after week 2? Absolutely. But I do think, like you mentioned, all of those things are a recipe for them being the best team in the conference. At the end of this, as we have this conversation, because we'll get to Washington State in a second. If you had to, because I'll tell you what I think, but if you had to predict between Oregon, Stanford, and Washington, who is going to come out of the Pac-12 North, is it Washington?
I think I would probably go Stanford.
Yep.
But if Washington won it, it would not surprise me at all.
It wouldn't surprise me if Oregon or Washington won it. The only reason I'm picking Stanford is because they have both of those teams at home, and that's it's huge in college football, man. It's huge.
But could you see it? Could you conceivably see where the three of them split against each other?
And then
like Washington beats Stanford, Stanford beats Oregon, and Oregon beats Washington.
Completely possible, and then it all comes down to teams like Cal. And
but then it becomes what has happened to the Pac-12 the last couple of years, where they cannibalize themselves and no one makes the playoff. Right?
Well, no one's making the playoff. I'll tell you that right now.
Fair enough.
I don't think any of these teams are making the playoff,
even if they go undefeated.
It's gonna be tough, bro. It's gonna be real tough.
Be interesting.
I mean, if Stanford goes undefeated with a powerhouse win over UCF, then maybe.
But that's not gonna happen.
But we know that's not gonna happen, so I don't think it's gonna be a big deal. All right, Washington State. Let's wrap this up.
Minshew's gone.
Yeah,
the mustache is gone.
The best, the GOAT with your Jacksonville Jaguars.
He got crushed in that first preseason game too, man. I was sad.
He was horrific.
He's going to have a chance to bounce back tonight. They're not playing any starters for the second straight week.
Fair enough.
But
anyway, Washington State.
Whoever does end up playing quarterback will have some weapons, right? Yep. They got two studs at receiver and Desmond Patman and Devontae and Martin. And then Max Borghi was like kind of fun at running back last year, catching out of the backfield, kind of just hitting the holes that were there. And Mike Leach is a genius. There's no other way to describe him other than he's just a genius. That game against Houston is going to be so much fun to watch.
That's what I was just about to say. They play Houston and UCLA back-to-back weeks. Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
And then they get slapped in the face by Utah.
All right, let's watch. Can we get just a Washington State network? Because I just want to watch Houston and UCLA against Washington State. Like, those games are going to be so silly. Those games are going to be ridiculous. The pace in those games are going to be outrageous. Those are going to be, both teams are going to score in the 60s in both of them. I think the thing with Washington State is without Gardner Minshew, a quarterback that you knew you could trust, and being in the scenario where you now have a new quarterback under a new head coach, you did lose some other pieces on that offense. Does 8-4 feel relatively normal for Washington State here? Like, Washington State shouldn't be a powerhouse program.
I mean, they had one of the best seasons in their program recent history last year, right?
Right, and that not to say that's not saying it's a fluke. They can definitely build off of it, but regressing back to 8 or 9 wins does feel reasonable, right? Like, I don't think that Washington State's going to sit here and necessarily threaten in the same way that they did last year. Like, last year, they were a top 10 team at the end of the regular season. Like, they were a team that everybody
could have won the Pac-12.
Everybody in America was hoping that they would win the Pac-12 so that we could beg to put them in the college football playoff because they were so fun. But let's be real, they were not that team. Like, they weren't that. Like, they were beating teams.
I will say I was surprised when I looked at their stats on defense last year, and they were a top 20, like a top 30 defense last season.
Yeah, that's they were.
If you look at advanced metrics, they were like a top 60 defense.
Right, but they were pounding people. offensively, and that obviously helps the defense. I guess my thought would be the Washington State's going to finish fourth in their side of the conference, and that doesn't mean they're going to have a bad season.
That's the best. That's the best part of the conference too. So there's no
Right.
shame in that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just they're going to be really, really fun. You're going to always want to watch when they're on Pac-12 After Dark. You're really going to enjoy watching them.
Yeah.
They're the best. They're as sensual as it gets. Mike Leach.
Sneakily have some of the best jerseys.
Just look at Mike Leach, and you go, "That's sensual."
Yeah, 100%.
Oh yeah. But yeah, 8-4 feels just about reasonable. I don't even really need to look at the schedule to say it. You know, like at Oregon, at Cal, at Washington.
Last Pac-12 thing I have before we go. What do you think of Oregon having the like ridiculously sized numbers on their jersey? Do you think it looks stupid?
I think it's kind of cool.
Okay, yeah, I can't decide whether I like it or not.
Yeah, I think I might hate it in a year.
Yeah,
right now, I always appreciate when a program tries to do something different. Like for that matter, you've seen those horrible Michigan State uniforms with the neon.
Oh, those are terrible. Those are like those USF. Remember USF tried to do neon?
Yeah. Michigan State did it better than USF did. USF's was.
It would be hard to do worse than USF did.
But Michigan State, like, I hate them, but I appreciate that they tried.
Yep, exactly.
You know, like, for that matter, remember when the Gators wore the alligator skin looking jerseys?
What was your opinion on those?
Those were the worst jerseys I've ever seen in my life. Other than
I have a friend that he's a Florida fan, so it's a little like different. But he thinks those are the sweetest jerseys of all time.
No, I think they're probably the worst jerseys that have ever been worn in college football.
Yeah, they're terrible. Horrendous.
But I appreciate that they tried to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I love when teams try to do something different. So I'll give Oregon some credit there. The big numbers. They were the first to do the whole the nameplate, like where it was a different color as a like almost like a colored in line. So yeah, shout out to Oregon and all of their different uniforms. And also,
what happens when you got Nike money, right?
Right. Well, I mean, Oregon's the path to UCF in terms of uniforms. That's my 5th UCF reference, and we should just end this right there.
All right. Thank you guys so much for watching.
Yeah, please like, subscribe.
Check out our Facebook page.
Review. Yeah, we have a Facebook page now. Shout out Facebook. Yeah. We're old people that have Facebook. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. And we have one more left. We got the SEC next week, and then you'll know everything you need to know about college football going into the UF game next Saturday night.
And we'll have a review of that game and a preview of the next week. So be ready for that.
Yes, we will. Can't wait. All right, guys.